I came home from a 2-week business trip to Denver to find strangers planting tomatoes in my backyard. At first, I thought I was seeing things. My house sat on a corner lot in Meadowbrook Estates, a planned community in Scottsdale, Arizona that prided itself on strict landscaping standards and property values that just kept climbing. I'd bought the place 3 years ago specifically because of the large lot, nearly half an acre, with plenty of space between me and my neighbors. The extra land cost me a premium, but it was worth every penny for the privacy. Now, as I pulled into my driveway on that scorching June afternoon, I could see at least a dozen people milling around in what used to be my pristine desert landscaping. They'd ripped out my carefully cultivated saguaro cacti and replaced them with raised garden beds, trellises, and what looked like a storage shed. I sat in my truck for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. My name is Trevor Eckhart, and I'm a software consultant who travels frequently for work. I'm 34, single, and I bought this house because it was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place where I could come home and not deal with anyone else's drama. That theory was about to be tested. I got out of my truck and walked around to the backyard, where a middle-aged woman with a severe blonde bob was directing traffic like she owned the place. She wore khaki shorts, a visor, and a polo shirt with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA logo embroidered on the chest. "Excuse me," I said, my voice remarkably calm considering the circumstances. "What exactly is going on here?" The woman turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hello, are you here to volunteer? We can always use more hands. I'm Patricia Donnelly, the HOA president." "I'm Trevor Eckhart. I own this property." Her smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Oh, Mr. Eckhart, we weren't expecting you back until next week, clearly. Now, would you mind explaining why you've destroyed my landscaping and built a garden on my property without my permission?" Patricia's expression hardened. "This isn't your property. This is community land, designated for the new Meadowbrook Community Garden. It's all been approved by the HOA board." I felt my blood pressure rising. "This is absolutely my property. I have the deed and the survey to prove it." "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Patricia said, her tone taking on that particular condescension that certain people reserve for when they're absolutely convinced they're right. "The community garden was built on the vacant lot adjacent to your property line. Perhaps you're confused about where your property ends." I looked around at the garden beds, which extended well beyond what could possibly be considered adjacent to my property. They were smack in the middle of my backyard, at least 20 feet past my fence line. "I'm not confused," I said. "This is my land, all of it, and you need to remove everything you've built here immediately." Patricia crossed her arms. "Mr. Eckhart, I don't appreciate your tone. The HOA has invested considerable time and resources into this community garden. We have the paperwork showing that this land was designated as common area in the original development plans. Then your paperwork is wrong. I want everyone off my property right now." "You're the one who's trespassing," Patricia said, her voice rising. "This is community property, and you have no right to be here making demands. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I actually laughed at that. "You're asking me to leave my own property, security." Patricia called out, and to my amazement, a rent-a-cop in an ill-fitting uniform came jogging over. "Madam, this man is trespassing on community property and refusing to leave. Please escort him back to his vehicle." The security guard looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area." "This is my house," I said, pointing to the back door. "That's my address. I own this land." "Sir, the HOA has jurisdiction over all community spaces." If you have a dispute about property lines, you'll need to take it up with the board at the next meeting. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Patricia immediately objected. You can't photograph people without their permission. I'm documenting the illegal construction on my private property, I said. Every single person here is trespassing. I took dozens of photos, making sure to capture the extent of the garden, the shed, and all the people working on my land. Several volunteers looked uncomfortable and started drifting away. Patricia's face was turning an impressive shade of red. If you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police, she threatened. Please do, I said. I'd love to have this documented officially. She pulled out her phone and dialed. I continued photographing everything while she spoke to the dispatcher, describing me as a hostile individual causing a disturbance on community property. I walked back to my truck and grabbed the folder I kept in my glove compartment. Inside was a copy of my property survey, completed just before I closed on the house. I'd learned early in life to keep important documents accessible. By the time I returned to the backyard, Patricia was finishing her call with the police. They'll be here in 10 minutes, she announced triumphantly. Good, I said, and sat down on one of the new garden benches they'd installed to wait. The volunteers had largely dispersed, probably not wanting to deal with police involvement. Patricia stood guard like she was protecting Fort Knox, occasionally shooting me dirty looks. The security guard looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. True to Patricia's word, 2 Scottsdale police officers arrived about 12 minutes later. They parked in front of my house and walked around to the backyard. Someone called about a disturbance, the first officer asked. He was in his 40s, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with petty complaints. Yes, officer, Patricia said, rushing forward. This man is trespassing on HOA property and has been verbally aggressive toward our volunteers. That's not exactly accurate, I said, standing up. I'm Trevor Eckhart. I own the property at 4782 Desert Bloom Drive, which is right there. I pointed to my house. This garden was built on my private property without my knowledge or consent while I was out of town. The second officer, younger and clearly newer to the job, pulled out a notepad. Do you have proof of ownership, sir? I handed him my folder. Property survey, deed, and my driver's license showing this address. He examined the documents while the older officer talked to Patricia, who was insisting that the land was designated as community space. Madam, do you have documentation showing this is HOA property? The older officer asked. Not with me, but it's all on file at the HOA office. This was approved at our March board meeting. And Mr. Eckhart, your survey clearly shows this area as part of your lot. Yes, sir. The property line extends 40 feet beyond my back fence. All of this garden is on my land. The younger officer handed the documents back to me. The survey looks legitimate and recent. You have this same documentation, madam? Patricia looked flustered. I don't carry property surveys around with me, but I assure you, the HOA has done its due diligence. Here's what we're going to do, the older officer said. This is a civil property dispute, not a criminal matter. You both need to gather your documentation and either work this out between yourselves or take it to court. In the meantime, no one should be doing any more work on this land until ownership is established. But we have volunteers scheduled for the rest of the week, Patricia protested. Then I suggest you reschedule them until this is resolved. Mr. Eckhart, as the person claiming ownership with documentation on hand, you have the right to ask people to leave your property. I want everyone off my land, I said firmly, and I want all of this removed. We've invested thousands of dollars in this garden, Patricia said, her voice shaking with anger. You can't just destroy community property. It's not community property, I said. It's mine and you built on it without permission. The officers spent another 10 minutes trying to calm Patricia down and ensuring that everyone understood the situation. Eventually, she left, though not before promising that I'd be hearing from the HOA's lawyers. After they were all gone, I stood in my backyard and surveyed the damage. They'd built 8 raised garden beds, each about 4 feet by 8 feet, filled with soil and various plants. There was a 6 by 8 storage shed, painted in what I assumed were the community's approved colors. They'd installed an irrigation system with sprinkler heads every few feet, and there was a gravel pathway connecting everything together. The worst part was what they'd removed. 3 mature saguaro cacti, each probably 50 years old, had been uprooted. Desert landscaping rocks I'd carefully arranged were gone. The natural desert plants I'd maintained were destroyed. I spent the rest of the evening on the phone with my attorney, Mark Richardson, explaining the situation. He was based in Phoenix and had handled my house closing. They did what? He asked after I'd finished describing the scene. Built an entire community garden on my property, ripped out my landscaping, installed irrigation, the whole 9 yards. And you're certain it's on your property? Mark, I'm looking at the survey right now. My lot extends 60 feet past my back fence line. The garden is smack in the middle of my land. Okay, this is actually pretty clear-cut legally, though it's going to be a pain to resolve. I'll draft a cease and desist letter tonight and have it hand-delivered to the HOA board tomorrow. You should also send them a certified letter documenting everything and demanding removal of all structures. What if they refuse? Then we file suit for trespassing, property damage, and the cost of restoration. But Trevor, these things can get ugly. HOAs have legal funds and sometimes they dig in just on principle. They destroyed 50-year-old saguaro cacti, Mark. I'm not just letting this go. I wouldn't expect you to. I'll get started on the paperwork. In the meantime, document everything. Photos, videos, anything you can think of. And don't let them back on your property. The next morning, I woke up to find Patricia and 2 other board members standing in my front yard. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Mr. Eckhart," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We'd like to resolve this misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. You built on my property without permission." "We've reviewed our records," said one of the men, who introduced himself as Gerald Fletcher, the HOA treasurer. "And we believe there may have been an error in the original plat maps." "An error," I said. "My survey is from 3 years ago. It was done by a licensed surveyor before I bought the house." "Yes, but the original development plans from 2008 show that section as community space," said the other woman, introducing herself as Susan Whitmore, the HOA secretary. "Then the original plans were wrong, or they changed when the lots were actually subdivided and sold. My survey is definitive." "We'd like to commission our own survey," Gerald said. "At HOA expense, of course. If it turns out we're wrong, we'll make it right." That seemed reasonable except for one thing. "And in the meantime, we'd like to continue with the garden. The plants need care, and we have a ribbon-cutting ceremony scheduled for next Saturday." I almost laughed. "Absolutely not. Nothing happens on my property until this is resolved." "You're being unreasonable," Patricia said, her mask slipping. "This garden benefits the entire community. Property values will increase. People will have access to fresh vegetables. Children will learn about nature. Those are all great things, and you're welcome to build a garden on actual community property. But not on my land. We could offer you compensation," Gerald suggested. "Perhaps a reduction in your HOA fees for the next few years." "I don't want compensation. I want my property returned to its original condition. Susan shook her head. That's going to be very expensive. The saguaro removal alone cost us $2,000. You mean the illegal removal of protected cacti from my property? Yes, let's talk about that. In Arizona, it's illegal to remove saguaro cacti without a permit. Did you have one? The three of them exchanged glances. We were told they were dead, Patricia said quickly. They were alive when I left for Denver. I have photos dated from 2 weeks ago showing healthy cacti. This is getting us nowhere, Gerald said. We'll hire a surveyor and settle this once and for all. In the meantime, we're placing a lien on your property for unpaid special assessments related to the community garden construction. You're charging me for illegally building on my property. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates was assessed $1,500 for the garden project. You'll find the notice in your HOA packet from March. I never received any HOA packet in March. We have records showing it was mailed to your address, Susan said primly, and I'm telling you I never received it. You can't charge me for something I didn't agree to, and that was built on my private property. That's not how HOAs work, Mr. Eckhart. The majority approved the project, which means all homeowners share the cost. If you don't pay, we can foreclose on your property. I'd had enough. Get off my property. All communication from this point forward goes through my attorney. You're making a huge mistake, Patricia said. The HOA has significant resources and legal backing. You'll spend thousands fighting this and lose anyway. I'll take my chances. Now leave. They left, but not before Patricia turned back at the end of my driveway and said, "You know, we were trying to be nice about this. You're going to regret making this difficult." I called Mark immediately and told him about the lien threat. They can't put a lien on your property for a special assessment you didn't agree to, especially when it's for construction on your own land. That's absurd. I'll include that in the cease and desist. Trevor, I have to warn you, this is escalating quickly. They destroyed my landscaping, and now they're threatening to foreclose on my house. What choice do I have? None, really. I just want you to be prepared for a fight. Mark's cease and desist letter was delivered that afternoon. By evening, I'd received a response from the HOA's attorney, a lawyer named Brenda Walsh from a firm in Phoenix that specialized in HOA disputes. Her letter was 3 pages of legalese that boiled down to: the HOA believed they were correct. They'd hired their own surveyor, and I needed to stop harassing board members and interfering with community projects. I hadn't harassed anyone, but apparently asking people to leave my property constituted harassment in Patricia's version of events. The next few days were quiet. I set up a camera system covering my backyard, just in case anyone decided to trespass again. I worked from home, catching up on projects I'd neglected during my trip. On Friday, a surveyor showed up with HOA authorization to access the property. I met him at the front door. "Good morning. I'm Dave Winters from Precision Land Surveying. The HOA hired me to survey the property line between your lot and the adjacent community space." "There is no adjacent community space," I said, "but you're welcome to do your survey. I'd actually appreciate an independent verification." Dave was a pleasant guy in his 50s who clearly didn't want to be in the middle of a property dispute. He spent 3 hours taking measurements, checking property pins, and comparing his findings to the county records. When he finished, he came to my front door looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Eckhart, I need to file my official report with the HOA, but I thought you should know. Your original survey is correct. This entire area, including everything the HOA built, is within your property boundaries." "You're certain?" "Absolutely. The property pins are right where they should be. I even checked them against the county's GPS coordinates. There's no ambiguity here. This is your land. What do you think they'll do when you tell them? Dave shrugged. No idea, but I've done HOA surveys before. Sometimes they accept the results. Sometimes they hire another surveyor hoping for a different answer. Just depends on how reasonable the board is. Based on my interactions with Patricia, I wasn't optimistic. Dave submitted his report on Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from Brenda Walsh, the HOA's attorney. Mr. Eckhart, I've reviewed the survey results. It appears there was indeed an error in the HOA's understanding of the property boundaries. So you'll remove everything from my property. We'd like to discuss alternatives. The HOA has invested over $30,000 in this garden project. Simply removing everything would be a significant loss to the community. That's not my problem. They should have verified the property lines before they started construction. What if we offered to purchase the land? The HOA could buy that portion of your lot, turning it into actual community space. I'd been expecting this. I'm not interested in selling. I bought this property specifically because of the large lot size. We could offer you above market value. Say $50,000 for that section. It was tempting, I had to admit. $50,000 for land I wasn't actively using. But it was the principle of the thing. They'd trespassed, destroyed my property, and now thought they could just write a check and make it go away. No, thank you. I want my property restored to its original condition. Mr. Eckhart, be reasonable. We're talking about removing plants that are already growing, dismantling structures that are already built. It's wasteful. You should have thought about that before you built on land you didn't own. I strongly advise you to reconsider. The HOA board is prepared to fight this. So am I. She hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, I got my first violation notice from the HOA. According to Patricia's letter, my front lawn grass was 1/4 inch too tall, violating community standards. I had 72 hours to correct the violation or face a $50 fine. I didn't have grass in my front lawn. Like most of my neighbors, I had desert landscaping with gravel and native plants. The violation notice included a photo of my front yard, showing the perfectly maintained landscape. They were retaliating, and they weren't even being subtle about it. The violations continued. On Wednesday, I was cited for parking my truck in my driveway overnight, supposedly violating a rule about commercial vehicles. My truck was a standard Ford F-150, identical to at least a dozen others in the neighborhood. On Thursday, they claimed my house number wasn't visible enough from the street. The numbers were the same ones that had been there when I bought the house, meeting all local and HOA requirements. Friday brought a violation for an unauthorized structure in my backyard. The structure in question was a patio table and chairs I'd owned for 2 years. I forwarded every violation notice to Mark, who was building quite a file. "They're harassing you," he said during our Friday afternoon call. "This is actually good for our case. It shows a pattern of retaliation." It's annoying as hell. I know, but document everything. Don't pay any of the fines. We'll deal with all of it at once. The following Tuesday, I had to attend the monthly HOA board meeting. According to the bylaws, property owners had the right to address the board during the open comment period. I intended to make my position very clear. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a Mediterranean-style building near the neighborhood entrance. About 30 homeowners were in attendance, which was apparently a high turnout. Word of the property dispute had spread through the community. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. She went through the standard agenda items, approving the previous meeting's minutes, discussing the budget, reviewing landscaping bids. Finally, she opened the floor for homeowner comments. I stood up. Trevor Eckhart, 4782 Desert Bloom Drive. I'm here to address the illegal construction on my property and the retaliatory violations I've been receiving. Patricia's smile was glacier cold. Mr. Eckhart, the board has already addressed the property line issue. As you know, we commissioned an independent survey, which confirmed that everything you built is on my private property. So when will you be removing it? The board is exploring all options, including the possibility of a land purchase or easement agreement. I've already declined to sell. I want my property restored. Gerald Fletcher spoke up. Mr. Eckhart, you need to consider what's best for the community. This garden has been a dream project for years. Children are learning about agriculture. Seniors have a place to gather and socialize. You'd be taking that away over a technicality. It's not a technicality. It's my property. And you need to remove everything you've built on it. That's going to cost the HOA a fortune, Susan Whitmore added. Money that comes from all homeowners' dues. You'd be punishing the entire community. I'm not punishing anyone. The HOA made a mistake and now needs to fix it. That's not my responsibility. A man I didn't recognize raised his hand. I'm Chuck Morrison, 4823 Desert Bloom. I have a question for the board. How did this mistake happen? Don't we have procedures to verify property lines before major construction? Patricia looked uncomfortable. There was an administrative error. The person who reviewed the plat maps misread the lot designations. Who was that person? Chuck asked. That's personnel information. So someone on the HOA staff made a $30,000 mistake, and now you want this man to give up his property to cover for it. Several other homeowners murmured in agreement. Patricia's face flushed. The community approved this project. We voted on it. We voted on a community garden, another woman said. Not on building it on someone's private property. That's completely different. If the HOA used my property for this garden, what's to stop them from using anyone else's? Chuck added. This sets a terrible precedent. The meeting devolved into arguments. Some homeowners agreed with me, pointing out that property rights needed to be respected. Others sided with the HOA, arguing that I was being selfish and the garden was already built, so we should just work something out. Patricia eventually gavelled the meeting back to order. The board will take all comments under advisement. We'll be meeting with our attorney and will communicate our decision to Mr. Eckhart within 30 days. I don't need 30 days, I said. I need you off my property now. If you don't begin removal within 1 week, I'll file suit. That's your choice, Mr. Eckhart, but I assure you the HOA has substantial legal resources. I left the meeting frustrated but not surprised. At least some of the homeowners seemed to be on my side. The next morning, I found the garden completely destroyed. Someone had come during the night and ripped out every plant, smashed the raised beds, and spray-painted profanity across the storage shed. The irrigation system had been torn apart, with water spraying everywhere from broken pipes. It was total devastation. I immediately called the police and Mark. The same 2 officers from before showed up to take a report. Any idea who did this? The older officer asked. No, but I can tell you who's going to blame me. The HOA is going to say I did this to avoid having to let them remove everything properly. Did you? No. I have security cameras. I can show you I was inside all night. The camera footage showed a dark figure, or possibly multiple figures, arriving around 2 in the morning. They wore dark clothes and kept their faces covered. The motion-activated lights in my backyard had triggered, but whoever it was moved quickly and was gone within 30 minutes. Looks like vandalism, the younger officer said. Could be random. Could be someone making a statement about the property dispute. Can you identify anyone from the footage? It's pretty grainy, and they kept their heads down. We'll take a copy and see if our tech guys can enhance it, but I'm not optimistic. By noon, Patricia was at my door with both officers still on scene. I want to file a complaint, she announced. Mr. Eckhart destroyed community property. Madam, we're already investigating this as a vandalism case, the older officer said. Mr. Eckhart has security footage showing he was inside his home all night. He could have hired someone. Do you have any evidence of that? Just look at the timing. We refuse to remove the garden and suddenly it's destroyed. It's obvious. Actually, madam, it benefits Mr. Eckhart for the garden to be removed properly, not vandalized. This way he's left with a mess and destroyed property. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting the HOA did this? I'm not suggesting anything. We're investigating all possibilities. After she left, the older officer pulled me aside. Off the record. This does seem suspicious. Someone made sure that garden couldn't be salvaged or relocated. That doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the HOA. Makes me wonder if there's a third party involved. Like who? Any neighbors who were opposed to the garden. Anyone who might have a grudge against the HOA. I thought about Chuck Morrison and the other homeowners who'd spoken up at the meeting. There were people at the board meeting who weren't happy with how the HOA handled this. But I can't imagine any of them doing something like this. The officer shrugged. People surprise you. We'll look into it. The vandalism changed everything. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a property dispute, it was news. A local TV station picked up the story, running a segment about HOA overreach and mysterious nighttime vandalism. The reporter interviewed me, Patricia, and several other homeowners. Patricia used the opportunity to paint me as an unreasonable property owner who cared more about a technicality than the community. I pointed out that the technicality in question was my legal property rights, and that I'd done nothing wrong. The publicity brought out strong opinions on both sides. I started getting emails and messages on social media, some supportive, others accusing me of being selfish and destroying a community project. What the publicity also brought out was information. 3 days after the news story aired, I got a call from a woman named Jennifer Cole. She'd lived in Meadowbrook Estates until last year when she sold her house and moved to Tucson. Mr. Eckhart, I saw your story on the news. I need to tell you something about Patricia Donnelly and the HOA board. I'm listening. Last year, I was fighting the HOA over a fence they wanted me to remove. It was inside my property lines and met all county regulations, but Patricia said it violated some aesthetic standard. When I refused to take it down, strange things started happening. My car was keyed. My mailbox was knocked over twice. Someone poured bleach on my front landscaping. Did you report it? Of course, but the police never found who did it. Then Patricia offered to drop the fence issue if I agreed to sell my house. She even had a buyer lined up, one of her friends who'd been looking in the neighborhood. That's quite a coincidence. That's what I thought. I couldn't prove anything, but the harassment stopped the day I accepted the offer on my house. Mr. Eckhart, I think Patricia might have had something to do with the vandalism on your property. She has a history of making problems disappear when they become inconvenient. Why didn't you report this? Report what? That I had a theory with no evidence. But I wanted you to know what you might be dealing with. I thanked her for the information and immediately called Mark. That's interesting but not particularly useful from a legal standpoint, he said. However, it might give the police a direction to investigate. I passed Jennifer's information along to the police. They said they'd look into it, but I got the sense that without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do, In the meantime, the vandalized garden sat in my backyard, a mess of broken wood, dead plants, and spray paint. My homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover it since I hadn't built it in the first place. The HOA claimed they weren't responsible since it happened after their surveyor confirmed it was my property. I hired a cleanup crew to remove everything, which cost me $4,500. The irrigation system repairs were another $1,200. Replacing the destroyed saguaro cacti would cost thousands more and take years for them to reach the size of the ones that had been removed. Mark filed suit against the HOA in Maricopa County Superior Court, seeking damages for trespassing, property destruction, and harassment. We asked for actual damages covering the cost of restoration, plus punitive damages and attorney's fees. The HOA, through Brenda Walsh, filed a countersuit claiming that I destroyed community property and demanding reimbursement for the garden construction costs plus the special assessment I'd refused to pay. We were going to court. The legal process moved slowly. Discovery took months, with both sides requesting documents, sending interrogatories, and taking depositions. I spent an entire day in Brenda Walsh's office answering questions about my property purchase, my work travel, and my interactions with the HOA board. Patricia's deposition was apparently quite dramatic. According to Mark, she stuck to the story that the HOA had done everything correctly, that the property line confusion was an honest mistake, and that I was being unreasonable and vindictive. She denied any involvement in the vandalism or the string of petty violations I'd received. The turning point came during the deposition of Susan Whitmore, the HOA secretary. Mark asked her about the process for approving the garden project. The board reviewed the proposal at our January meeting, Susan testified. Patricia presented the location and budget. We voted to approve it. Did anyone verify the property lines before approving the project? Patricia said she'd checked with the management company. Did you see any documentation confirming the property lines? No, but I trusted Patricia's judgment. At any point before construction began, did anyone physically survey the site? Susan hesitated. I don't think so. Patricia said everything was in order. So the board approved a $30,000 project based solely on Patricia's assurance that she'd checked with the management company. Patricia has been board president for 6 years. She's very thorough. Except in this case, where she wasn't. Later in the deposition, Mark asked about the special assessment. Every homeowner was charged $1,500 for the garden project. Is that correct? Yes. How was that assessment approved? The board voted on it in March. Did the full HOA membership vote on it? No, the board has authority to levy special assessments up to $2,000 per household. And Mr. Eckhart received notice of this assessment. Yes, it was mailed to all homeowners. You have proof that Mr. Eckhart received his notice. We have proof it was mailed. That's not the same thing, is it? Susan didn't have a good answer for that. The most damaging information came from the management company that handled Meadowbrook Estates' day-to-day operations. Under subpoena, they provided emails showing that Patricia had asked about using the vacant lot on Desert Bloom Drive for the garden. The management company had responded with a warning. Please verify ownership before proceeding. That area may be part of the corner lot property. We recommend a survey. Patricia had replied. Already confirmed with county records. It's community space, proceeding with approvals. Except she hadn't confirmed anything with county records. There was no evidence she'd checked the plat maps, contacted the county assessor, or done any verification whatsoever. She lied, Mark said when he showed me the emails. She told the management company she'd verified it, she told the board she'd verified it, and she did neither. This is negligence at best and possibly fraud. What does that mean for our case? It means we're in a very strong position. The HOA's insurance will likely push for settlement rather than go to trial. He was right. 2 weeks before our scheduled trial date, Brenda Walsh called with a settlement offer. The HOA will pay $85,000 to cover all damages, restoration costs, and your attorney's fees. In exchange, you'll drop the suit and sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. What about the special assessment and all the violation fines? I asked. Those would be waived. I discussed it with Mark. That's actually a reasonable offer, he said. Your actual damages are probably around $40,000 when you factor in landscaping restoration and all the hassle. The extra $45,000 covers your attorney's fees and gives you something for your trouble. What about Patricia? Does she face any consequences? That's not really up to us. The HOA board might take action or they might not. But Trevor, you need to decide what you want here. Is this about the money, or is it about making a point? I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to go to trial to expose Patricia's negligence publicly and make sure she faced consequences. But another part of me just wanted this nightmare to be over. What do you recommend? Take the settlement. You'll get your property restored, you'll be made whole financially, and you can move on with your life. Trials are expensive and stressful, and you never know what a jury will do. I agreed to the settlement with one addition. I wanted Patricia removed from the HOA board as part of the agreement. Brenda Walsh called back the next day. The HOA board has agreed to your terms, but with a modification. Patricia will resign from the board, but she'll characterize it as stepping down due to personal reasons, not as part of the settlement. Fine, as long as she's gone. We signed the settlement agreement in early February, 8 months after I'd first come home to find the garden on my property. The HOA's insurance company cut me a check for $85,000. I immediately hired a landscaping company specializing in desert environments to restore my backyard. They removed all traces of the garden, repaired the irrigation damage, and replanted native vegetation. I splurged on 3 mature saguaro cacti, transported from a licensed nursery and carefully installed with proper permits. The total restoration cost came to just over $42,000. After Mark's fees, I cleared about $28,000. More importantly, I had my property back. Patricia announced her resignation at the March board meeting, citing health reasons and a desire to spend more time with family. Nobody believed her, but nobody challenged the explanation either. The local news ran a brief follow-up story about the settlement, noting that the property dispute had been resolved, and the HOA would be implementing new procedures for verifying property lines before future projects. Chuck Morrison was elected as the new HOA president at the April meeting. One of his first actions was to commission a professional survey of all common areas in Meadowbrook Estates, ensuring that the community actually owned the land they thought they owned. They discovered 2 other areas where the HOA's understanding of property lines didn't match reality, though fortunately no construction had happened on either. The police never solved the vandalism case. The enhanced video didn't reveal the perpetrator's identity, and there wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone. I had my suspicions, but without proof, there was nothing to be done. Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal. The community did eventually build a garden on actual HOA property, a smaller plot near the clubhouse that was properly planned and executed. I was invited to the ribbon-cutting ceremony, but politely declined. I ran into Patricia once, about 6 months after the settlement, at a grocery store in Scottsdale. She was in the produce section, and we made eye contact across a display of tomatoes. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but she just turned and walked away. I didn't chase after her. There was nothing left to say. The following spring, my desert landscaping was thriving. The new saguaros had taken well, and the native plants were blooming. I set up a patio area in roughly the same spot where the garden shed had been, with a fire pit and comfortable chairs. On clear evenings, I'd sit out there with a beer and watch the sunset paint the McDowell Mountains in shades of orange and purple. Mark called one afternoon while I was working from home. I just heard through the legal grapevine. The HOA's insurance company dropped Meadowbrook Estates after the settlement. Something about inadequate oversight and excessive risk. They had to find new insurance at triple the premium. That's going to make me popular with the neighbors. You didn't do anything wrong, Trevor. The HOA created this mess. He was right, but I knew how these things worked. Some people would always see me as the guy who cost the community money, regardless of the facts. Surprisingly, that didn't happen. If anything, the property dispute had made other homeowners more aware of their rights and more skeptical of the board's decisions. Chuck ran the HOA with transparency and common sense, always verifying information before making major decisions. At the following year's annual meeting, someone proposed a bylaw change requiring property surveys before any construction on disputed or boundary areas. It passed unanimously. I eventually became friendly with several neighbors, including Chuck, who turned out to be a software engineer like me. We'd occasionally meet for coffee and complain about work projects and HOA minutiae. You know, Chuck said one Saturday morning, that whole mess with Patricia probably needed to happen. The board was operating like they could do whatever they wanted without accountability. Your case changed that. I just wanted my property back. Sure, but it had ripple effects. We're more careful now, we ask more questions. We don't just rubber stamp whatever the president wants. That's good, I guess. It is good. HOAs serve an important purpose, but they need checks and balances like any other organization. You provided that check. I thought about the whole experience as I drove home that day. The frustration, the anger, the legal battles, the stress. It had all been worth it to establish a principle. Property rights matter, even in an HOA, and boards can't just do whatever they want without consequences. A year later, I was contacted by a reporter writing a story about HOA disputes for a Phoenix magazine. She wanted to include my case as an example of what happens when HOAs overstep their authority. Would you do anything differently? She asked during our phone interview. I thought about it. I would have installed security cameras before leaving for my business trip. Other than that, no. I stood up for my rights. I followed the legal process and it worked out. Do you have any advice for other homeowners dealing with HOA disputes? Document everything. Take photos, save emails, keep records, and don't be afraid to stand your ground if you're right. HOAs count on people backing down because the fight seems too expensive or too difficult, but sometimes you have to fight. You still live in Meadowbrook Estates. I do. It's a nice community, and the new board leadership is much more reasonable. What about Patricia Donnelly? Have you had any contact with her since the settlement? No, and I hope to keep it that way. The article ran in the July issue with the headline, "When HOAs Go Too Far, Property Rights vs. Community Control." My case was featured prominently, along with several other examples of HOA overreach in Arizona communities. I got a few emails from readers thanking me for standing up to my HOA and asking for advice on their own disputes. I referred them all to Mark, who was building a nice practice area representing homeowners against their associations. 3 years after the garden incident, I was sitting in my backyard on a perfect Arizona evening when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a Phoenix area code. Mr. Eckhart, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Scottsdale Police Department. I'm calling about the vandalism case from 2025. Do you have a few minutes? My heart rate picked up. Of course. We've made an arrest in an unrelated case, a series of property crimes in North Scottsdale. During questioning, the suspect confessed to several additional incidents, including the vandalism at your property. Who was it? A man named Ryan Blackstone. He was hired by someone to destroy the garden on your property. He's agreed to testify against the person who hired him in exchange for a reduced sentence. I already knew what she was going to say next. The person who hired him was Patricia Donnelly. Even expecting it, the confirmation was shocking. She paid someone to destroy the garden. According to Mr. Blackstone, yes. She contacted him through an intermediary and paid him $2,000 to vandalize the garden and make it look random. Why would she do that? It didn't help her case. That's what we're trying to understand. My theory is that she knew the HOA was going to lose the property dispute, and she wanted to prevent the garden from being moved to another location. If it was destroyed, she could blame you and generate sympathy for the HOA. That's insane. It's certainly vindictive. We're filing charges against Miss Donnelly for criminal damage and conspiracy. Given the dollar amount, it's a felony. I wanted to let you know before it becomes public. Thank you for telling me. You'll likely be contacted by the prosecutor's office. They may want you to testify if this goes to trial. After we hung up, I sat in my backyard for a long time, processing the news. Patricia had been willing to commit a felony to maintain her narrative and punish me for challenging her. It was a level of vindictiveness I had trouble comprehending. The story made local news the next day. Former HOA president arrested for vandalism conspiracy was the headline. The news coverage included details about the original property dispute, the settlement, and now the criminal charges. My phone rang constantly. Neighbors wanting to know what I knew, reporters asking for interviews, even a producer from a true crime podcast wanting to cover the story. I declined all interviews and referred everyone to the police. Patricia's trial was scheduled for October. The prosecutor, a young woman named Rachel Torres, called me in September to prepare me for testimony. We have a strong case, she said. Mr. Blackstone is cooperating fully, and we have phone records showing contact between Miss Donnelly and the intermediary she used to hire him. Her attorney is pushing for a plea deal. What kind of deal? Probation, restitution, and community service. No jail time. She committed a felony, I know, and I'd like to see her do time. But the reality is that first-time offenders in property crimes rarely get jail sentences. We could go to trial and risk losing, or we can take a deal that ensures she's held accountable and you get restitution for the damage. How much restitution? Whatever you spent cleaning up and repairing the damage from the vandalism. Do you have receipts? I'd kept everything, of course. The cleanup cost had been $4,500, and the irrigation repairs another $1,200. I provided copies of all the invoices. Patricia accepted the plea deal in late October. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay $6,700 in restitution to me. The judge also gave her a stern lecture about abusing positions of authority and the importance of respecting property rights. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. She read a prepared statement apologizing for her actions and claiming she'd let stress and pride cloud her judgment. The judge wasn't impressed. Miss Donnelly, you were in a position of trust and authority. Rather than admit a mistake and work to fix it, you chose to commit a crime. You're fortunate that the prosecutor agreed to this plea deal because I would have had no problem imposing a jail sentence had this gone to trial. After the hearing, Rachel Torres caught up with me in the hallway. Justice doesn't always look the way we want it to, she said. But Patricia has a felony conviction now. She can't serve on an HOA board. She'll have trouble finding certain types of employment. And everyone in her community knows what she did. Sometimes social consequences are more powerful than legal ones. She was right. Within a month, Patricia and her husband sold their house in Meadowbrook Estates and moved to Tucson. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that her husband had been horrified by what she'd done, and their marriage was strained. The restitution check arrived in January, exactly $6,700. I'd already been reimbursed by the settlement, so the money felt like a windfall. I donated it to a local nonprofit that provided legal assistance to homeowners in disputes with HOAs and landlords. Mark thought that was appropriate. Turning something negative into something positive. I like it. I just want to be done with all of this. You are done. Patricia's gone, the property is restored, and you even got a little justice. That's a better outcome than most HOA disputes. He was right, but it had taken a toll. The stress of the legal battle, the community division, the vandalism, and then the criminal case had dominated 2 years of my life. I was ready to move forward. I started dating someone I met through a professional conference, a marketing consultant named Grace Fisher who lived in Tempe. She thought the whole HOA saga was both horrifying and hilarious. You bought a house for peace and quiet, and instead you got a legal nightmare, she said over dinner one evening. Pretty much sums it up. Would you move? I'd thought about it, honestly. But my house was beautiful, the neighborhood was good, and Chuck was doing a great job running the HOA. No, I don't think so. I'm invested now, literally and figuratively. Plus you won, Grace pointed out. Why let them drive you out after you established your rights? That was true. Moving would feel like letting Patricia win, even though she was long gone. Grace and I got serious over the next year. She started spending weekends at my place, and we talked about her eventually moving in. She loved the backyard with its desert landscaping and the view of the mountains. This is worth fighting for, she said one evening as we sat by the fire pit watching the stars. I understand now why you didn't just walk away. It wasn't about the land, really. It was about not letting someone take advantage of me just because they had a board position and an attitude. Well, you won. And you have a great story to tell at parties, I laughed. Yeah, I'm the guy who fought the HOA and lived to tell about it. The following summer, Grace and I got engaged. We planned a small wedding at a venue in Paradise Valley with a view of Camelback Mountain. Among the guests were Mark, Chuck and his wife, and several neighbors from Meadowbrook Estates. During the reception, Chuck raised a glass for a toast. To Trevor, who taught our HOA board an important lesson about property rights and accountability. And to Grace, who's brave enough to marry into our crazy community. Everyone laughed, and Grace squeezed my hand. No regrets, she whispered. I looked around at the people who'd supported me through the whole ordeal, at the beautiful venue, at my fiancé who loved me despite my tendency to fight for principles, even when it would be easier to walk away. No regrets. Grace and I bought a bigger house together 2 years later, still in Scottsdale but in a different neighborhood with a much more laid-back HOA. We kept my original house as a rental property, which Mark thought was funny. After everything you went through, you're staying connected to Meadowbrook Estates. It's a good investment. And besides, Chuck runs a tight ship. No more rogue garden projects. My tenant was a young couple with no interest in HOA drama. They paid rent on time, maintained the property, and never had issues with the board. It was remarkably boring and wonderfully profitable. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm grateful for the outcome even though the journey was difficult. I learned that standing up for your rights, even against an organization with resources and authority, is possible if you're willing to commit to the fight. I learned that documentation is everything in legal disputes. And I learned that most people, when presented with clear facts, will side with what's right rather than what's convenient. The community garden eventually thrived in its proper location on actual HOA property. Ironically, I sometimes donate extra vegetables from my own backyard garden to the community harvest program. Grace finds this hilarious. You're literally giving them vegetables now, after fighting them about the garden on your property. That was about principles, not vegetables. I know, but it's still funny. She's right, of course. The whole situation had absurd elements from start to finish, but it also had serious implications about property rights, HOA authority, and what happens when people abuse positions of power. Chuck served 3 terms as HOA president before stepping down and passing the role to someone equally competent. Under his leadership, Meadowbrook Estates implemented reforms that became a model for other communities. Property surveys before any construction, transparent budgeting, regular homeowner input, limits on board authority without membership votes. I was interviewed about the case again years later for a legal journal article about HOA governance. The author wanted to know if I thought the system worked. Eventually, yes, I said. But it took way too long and cost too much. The ideal would be better oversight from the beginning, so these situations don't escalate to lawsuits and criminal charges. What would you tell someone facing a similar situation? Know your rights. Get everything in writing. Don't back down if you're clearly right. And hire a good attorney early, not after things have already spiraled out of control. The article quoted me extensively and used my case as an example of why HOA reform was needed across Arizona and nationally. My story took on a life of its own in homeowner advocacy circles. I was invited to speak at a conference about HOA disputes, which felt surreal. I'm a software consultant, not a community organizer or legal expert. But I shared my experience, emphasizing the importance of standing firm on property rights and not being intimidated by organizations that seem more powerful. The audience responded enthusiastically, and several people came up afterward to share their own HOA horror stories. One woman told me about an HOA that tried to fine her for having the wrong color flowers in her garden. A man described being cited for parking violations when he was working in his own driveway. A couple explained how their HOA tried to foreclose on their house over a disputed assessment. The stories reinforced what I'd learned. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining property values and community standards, but without accountability and oversight, they can become tools of abuse. Grace and I eventually had kids, 2 boys who loved playing in the backyard of our new house. When they were old enough to understand, I told them the story of the community garden and why their dad had fought the HOA. "So you won because you were right?" my older son asked. "I won because I had evidence proving I was right, and I was willing to fight for it." "Did the bad lady go to jail?" "No, but she had to pay a fine and do community service, and she can't be on an HOA board anymore." "Good," he said firmly. My younger son wanted to know if we could build a garden in our backyard. Grace and I looked at each other and laughed. "Sure, buddy, we'll build it together." On our own property. We did build that garden, a small raised bed where the boys grew tomatoes, peppers, and strawberries. They loved checking on the plants every day and harvesting vegetables. Grace made sure to take photos and post them on social media with captions about properly placed gardens. The whole experience. From that moment, I came home to find strangers on my property through the legal battle and Patricia's eventual criminal conviction. Taught me lessons I'll carry forever. It's easy to be cynical about the justice system and assume that organizations with money and lawyers will always win. But sometimes, if you have the facts on your side and you're willing to persist, justice actually prevails. It's not quick, and it's not easy, but it's possible. I drive past my old house occasionally when I'm in that part of Scottsdale. The desert landscaping looks great, the saguaros are growing, and there's no sign of the drama that unfolded there years ago. It's just a nice house in a nice neighborhood, which is exactly what I wanted in the first place. Grace says I should write a book about the experience. Maybe someday I will. For now, I'm content with this chapter of my life being closed and with the knowledge that I stood up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to back down. And whenever I hear about someone else dealing with HOA overreach, I share my story and offer the same advice. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight back. Because property rights matter, principles matter, and sometimes you have to stand firm even when everyone is telling you to compromise. The last I heard, Patricia was working in retail in Tucson, having trouble finding professional employment with a felony conviction on her record. Her husband divorced her 2 years after they moved. She's rebuilding her life, presumably with a better understanding of boundaries and consequences. I don't wish her ill, but I don't feel guilty about the outcome either. She made choices that hurt people and broke laws. The consequences were appropriate. As for me, I'm living a good life with my family in a house we own completely, with property lines that are clearly established and respected. I volunteer with the homeowner advocacy group I donated to, helping other people navigate disputes with their HOAs. And every time I sit in my backyard, surrounded by properly placed gardens and happy kids, I'm reminded that fighting for what's right isn't always popular, but it's always worth it. The community garden incident started as a nightmare, but ended up teaching me valuable lessons about standing firm, trusting the legal system, and never assuming that titles or authority make someone right. Sometimes the little guy wins. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes you come home from a business trip to find your property destroyed, and through persistence and principle, you end up not just whole but stronger than before. That's the story I tell my kids, the lesson I want them to learn. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because that's how you live with integrity, and that's how you make sure people who abuse power face consequences. The saguaros in my old backyard are thriving, standing tall against the desert sky, just like they should be. Just like I stood tall against an HOA that thought they could take whatever they wanted without consequences. They were wrong. And I have the survey to prove it.